as chapter 46 opens. Jacob's clan is on their way to Egypt, but they make a stop in Beersheba, which is just on the border of the land of Canaan and Egypt. Let's see what happens there. We're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 46, verses 1 through 4. So Israel, we know that's Jacob's other name, given by God, took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions at night, and he said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here I am." And he said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go with you down into Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes." Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all had history in this place called Beersheba. And so it's no wonder before Jacob leaves the land of Canaan that he stops to worship there. God appears to Jacob there for the 6th time in his life. He reassures Jacob that it's okay to go to Egypt, and he gives Jacob 4 promises. He says, "I'm going to make you a great nation." Now, keep in mind, he's saying that he's going to accomplish that in Egypt, not in Canaan. He says, "I myself will go down with you to Egypt." Jacob doesn't need to be afraid because God will be with him wherever he goes. He says that I will also bring you up again. Maybe Jacob thought in his mind, well, okay, God's going to bring us up when this famine is over and we'll get to come back to Canaan. And then the 4th thing he says, he promises that Joseph's hand will close his eyes. That's an assurance that when Jacob dies, Joseph will be at his side. The family leaves Beersheba and continues on their journey to Egypt. Verses 8 through 27 of this chapter is a census of all the children and grandchildren of Jacob who went down to Egypt. Moses takes the time to record this, what might seem to us to be tedious information, because it is very significant to the history of the Hebrew people and to the nation of Israel. If the only Jewish history you knew was that Moses led the Jews out of Egypt through a series of plagues and the Red Sea parted, this scene in chapter 46 will fill in the gap and answer the question, well, how did all those Jews get in Egypt in the first place? This right here is the event, this famine, that brings the whole clan into the land of Egypt. Well, Judah has been sent on ahead of the rest of the clan to let Joseph know that his family is on their way. But instead of waiting for his father to come to him, as was his right as a lord of Egypt, Joseph gets on his chariot and goes to meet his father. Can't really blame him for his enthusiasm, can you? It had been at this point 22 years since Joseph had last seen his father. And what do you think Joseph does when he meets Jacob? Yep, he bawls, he cries his eyes out. Well, let's see what Joseph does next. While I'm reading this passage, I want you to listen for how shrewd Joseph has become. Since he's been Egyptianized to a certain extent, he understands the ways of Egypt and his boss in particular very well. We're going to read Genesis, starting in chapter 46 and reading into 47. Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and will tell Pharaoh and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. When Pharaoh calls you and says, 'What is your occupation?' you shall say, 'Your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. So Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, my father and my brothers with their flocks and their herds and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen. And from among his brothers he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, we your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were. Then they said to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. And now, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen. If you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. Then Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the days and years of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days and years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days and the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojournings. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food according to the number of their dependents. If Hebrews are an abomination to Egyptians, and shepherds, we've learned, are also an abomination to Egyptians, then why in the world would Joseph make sure that his brothers corroborated his story to Pharaoh that his family was a family of shepherds? You'd think they might want to keep that piece of family information secret. Here's my suggestion. If Pharaoh knows that these people are shepherds, he's not going to want them to live anywhere near himself. Even though it seems in the text he's being all nice and cordial about it, Joseph knows the score. Joseph must want his family to be separated. Joseph intentionally left most of his family back in Goshen, and it says that only 5 of his brothers and his fathers he brought to Pharaoh's court. Joseph tells the Pharaoh that his family is in Goshen, so he's planted a seed there in Pharaoh's mind that perhaps you might want to just leave them there. That's where they all are. Goshen, by the way, is the most fertile region in the Nile River Valley. It doesn't get much rainfall, but the Nile floods from other waters, and so it's very fertile. The brothers do as Joseph says, and they tell Pharaoh that they're shepherds, but in their excitement, they do what we've seen them do before. They kind of blather on, and they ask specifically to live in the land of Goshen. Now, this isn't something Joseph has told them to do, and I imagine Joseph is rolling his eyes at these guys who just do not understand how things are done here. So, mercifully, Pharaoh lets that breach of protocol go. He doesn't jump on it as he could have, because you don't tell a Pharaoh what to do, or it's enough to beseech his favor and let him decide where you're going to be. But Pharaoh overlooks that. And so not only does he overlook this breach of protocol, but he also gives the brothers a job as keeper of his very own livestock. So they're blessed with more responsibility, in this case to look after Pharaoh's herds and flocks. So the family now is settled in the land of Goshen. They have the best of the land that's available, but they also have something else. They have the protection of being isolated. Joseph's family is not going to be Egyptianized by being in close contact with the rest of the society. Can you see the method now behind Joseph's madness and why he specifically wanted pointed out his family was a family of shepherds? It protected them. You know, it was always a great concern to God that his people not intermingle with the people of Canaan. God wanted his people not to pick up their ways, not to pick up their pagan idolatry. Remember, they were not to intermarry with these people. If God was that careful about intermarriage and intermixing with the Canaanites, wouldn't he have the same concern with the Egyptians who were also pagan? Of course he would. So who cares if the Egyptians consider the Hebrews and their shepherding ways an abomination? It protected those Hebrews. And so it made me think, I don't know that I've ever thought before that the fact that someone may not like me could be in my best interest after all. It could be that God is using their dislike to protect me from some of their ways rubbing off on me. That's a thought to consider. Well, there are still 5 years of famine that are left to be played out in this prophetic timetable. And so, under Joseph's management, the stores of grain that Egypt has gathered and accumulated are sold to not only the people of Egypt, but also to the people of Canaan who come down to get the stores of grain as well. And it's not long before they've exhausted all their money. Where has that money ended up? It's ended up all in the coffers of the Pharaoh. Since there's no money, the next year, the people pay for the grain that they still obviously need with their livestock. So now Pharaoh owns all the livestock too. And then the next year, the people pay for the grain that they need with their land. Now the exception is the pagan priests who are under the patronage of Pharaoh. They keep their land, but all the rest of the land now belongs to Pharaoh as well. The next year, what are the people going to give to pay for their grain? They've already exhausted all their money. They've exhausted their herds and livestock. They've exhausted now the land that they own. All that's left to give is their labor. And they promise that when the land starts producing again, that they will give Pharaoh 20% of their harvests forever. Finally, Pharaoh also owns the people, except again for the pagan priests. Now we can be sure that Pharaoh thinks Joseph is a genius for orchestrating all this. What do you think the Egyptian people thought of Joseph? Surprisingly, they loved him. You know, he is the national hero who saved their lives. That's their outlook. They are grateful to be Pharaoh's servants. Now, that might seem odd to our sensibilities and to our American ears because we value and prize independence so highly. We do not never want to be anyone's slaves. I think of the state motto of the state of New Hampshire, and they have it on their license plates: live free or die. There's no choice. If I'm not going to live free, I'd rather die. Maybe these people, their motto that they live by is a verse that came later to be put in the text of Ecclesiastes that said, a living dog is better than a dead lion. As chapter 47 ends, Jacob dies at the age of 147 years. And before he dies, he makes Joseph promise that he's going to carry his bones back to the land of Canaan and bury them in the family cave at Machpelah. Something interesting to think about is that Jacob got to be reunited with Joseph for 17 years, which is exactly the amount of time that he had with him for the first 17 years of Joseph's life. There's such beautiful symmetry there. Sometimes God does work our lives in symmetry. I hope you'll join us next week on Scripturology.